are Malicious Compliance. The policy is absolutely no overtime without 48 hours advance approval. Got it? I do now. So this happened a long time ago. It was my first job after getting out of the military. The company I worked for was very, very cheap. They got all of their work by being the lowest bidder, and they did everything they could to pinch pennies. Most importantly, there was also a no overtime rule, which I quickly found out was strictly enforced. To be able to do any overtime, you had to get approval at least 48 hours in advance. If you got even 15 minutes of overtime, the smallest increment possible, they would make you take off 15 minutes early the very next day to make sure they didn't have to pay you overtime. And at the rates I was making in those days, 15 minutes equated to less than $2. In those few times I didn't get clocked out in time, my boss would give me a lecture the next day. He left at 4 and I worked until 7. Then he'd make me take off 15 minutes early to erase the overtime. Each time, he would ask me why and I would explain, which was always something understandable and justifiable. I'd still get the lecture about OT requiring 48 hours of approval prior to the overtime and a warning that if I did it again, I just wouldn't get paid for it. Fine, I get it. You don't want me to get overtime, no problem. It also seemed to be lost on him that every time we had the conversation, it would always take at least 30 minutes to talk about it, so the combined waste was a whole hour to talk about 15 minutes of excess time. One of my tasks was to take down the temperature of this one freezer they had. The thing was a huge walk-in freezer that contained a few $1,000s worth of inventory. The temperature was supposed to be under 32 degrees, or lower than that, I don't remember. But one day I saw the temperature was over 40, so I wrote it down and called the supervisor up front. He told me not to worry about it, he'd get the night crew to take a look at it and that I should get out of there before I get some overtime again. The next day I got a lecture from the boss about the 48-hour rule and was told not to do it again. So that evening, when it was close to the time for me to leave, I checked that freezer again and its temperature was up in the 40s again. I write it down on the log and call up the maintenance team. No one answers. I look at the clock. It's time for me to start heading to the exit to clock out. I thought about calling up that supervisor to tell him, but as far as I can tell, no one even looked at that freezer the night before. So I said, screw it. If I reported it, I was going to be late and my boss was going to lecture me again, so okay. Here's your malicious compliance. I knew the potential damage, but I also knew I was going to get a lecture if I tried to do anything about it, so have it your way. Don't want me to report it? Fine, I'm leaving for the night. The next morning, the boss calls me into his office. From there, I can see that the freezer is open and they have a work crew emptying out the contents onto carts, which they're taking to the dumpster. Apparently, everything, or almost everything, was ruined. When I get into the boss's office, he looks pissed. He's not the only one there, though. There's also the safety inspector, which I thought was odd because ordinarily, if there was something like this, it would be the maintenance boss, but he was out that day. I would have preferred the maintenance boss. Talking to that guy was like talking to your grandpa. The safety inspector was a bit of a character, and as such, you never really knew what he was going to say in an interview like this. While my boss was trying to point fingers at me for failing to notify anyone, the safety inspector, acting as maintenance boss, points out that clearly there's enough evidence of policy in place that the process is flawed and that he should take that as an out for him and me both. They end up having this huge investigation, or a witch hunt, but in the end, they come down to the conclusion that I didn't do anything wrong and was just following orders as I'd said. So to save $2 in OT, they let a few $1,000s worth of inventory go to waste. As far as I could tell, after I reported the problem the first time, no one said or did anything more about it, and even less the second time. Whatever was wrong with that freezer was going to take 2 months to fix, for whatever reason, so they had to rent a refrigerated tractor trailer, which I was told cost them $100 a day to lease. And if that's true, the mishap ended up costing somewhere around $10,000. I don't know if the repairs and trailer rental could have been avoided, but the lost inventory definitely could have been avoided. Second, malicious compliance. With the first incident behind me, or so I thought, we had someone on the early shift who quit. They needed someone to move from the afternoon shift from 11 to 7 to the morning shift from 4 to 12. Guess who they picked? I was told it was because I was the most junior person, but that didn't make sense because they'd hire another person after me and she was still there. I felt like it was punishment, but at the same time, I kind of wanted to be on the morning shift anyway, so I kept my mouth shut and took that shift as told. My popularity with the boss didn't improve though. For one thing, any time I'd request a day off, he'd just reject it. At first, it would be for reasons like, sorry, that's not enough notice, but I would sometimes tell him 3 or 4 months in advance and they would still always be refused. This also applied to holidays. Since we needed both shifts to work every single day, including all major holidays, not everyone could take holidays off, so I got stuck being on duty when it was a holiday. But I could bank my holiday and we'd be told that I could use that holiday later on a day of my own choosing, which meant never because my boss wouldn't approve them. When I got on the morning shift, we were short a man on the afternoon shift because I had gone to that morning shift. This was okay for a while. In typical corporate fashion, they didn't even post a job opening for a few weeks, so after a while, the afternoon shift was getting pretty ragged from doing all their work with a man absent. Typically, what would always happen in the past was that the boss would ask someone from the early shift to pull a double and would work an extra 7 hours. This was pretty rare because of the no overtime rule. One day, the boss called me into his office just before noon. He tells me, I need you to pull a double today. The second shift could really use the extra help. Okay, I said. As little as I made, I appreciated the overtime, but at the same time, this just made me feel used and abused, which kind of annoyed me. I couldn't take time off, not even on holidays, and as cheap as the company was, they were saving a ton of money by not hiring a third person for that shift, but would burn out the existing employees for a few extra bucks. Then I thought about it a little more and said, wait, I've worked 8 hours already. If I work till 7, that will give me, I counted up on my fingers just for dramatic effect, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7 hours of overtime for the day. I'm authorizing the overtime, my boss said. Okay, I said, then turned to leave and stopped again. Wait, authorizing it as in my paycheck will reflect 7 additional hours at time and a half? Or authorizing it as in when I get here tomorrow morning, I'll work an hour and you're going to send me home because I'm 7 hours ahead on my time card. 7 extra hours on your paycheck, he said. At time and a half? I asked. Yes, goddammit, he said. Okay, I said, then turned again, but then turned right back. Hey, wait a minute, you almost had me there. What are you talking about? My boss asked. That was pretty good, I said, wagging a finger at him. I almost fell for it too. Huh? He looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was. This is like some expert level Simon Says, I said. What are you on about? He asked me. You almost got me, I said. It's a trap. I looked at the wall where some of the notices were posted. Here it is. I pointed to a paper that had the no overtime rule on it. It even had my signature on it, along with the other employees. Right here, blah, 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 no overtime and 48-hour prior approval. And ha, here it is. Absolutely no exceptions. Whew, you almost had me with that one. Could you imagine if I had worked overtime? I wouldn't get paid right now because here today, this isn't 48 hours in advance of a few minutes from now. I smiled triumphantly at the boss and left his office and didn't do the overtime. I thought I was pretty slick. The next time it happened, my boss caught me in the hallway and said he needed me to work a double today. I nodded, then responded with, hey, wait a minute, do you mean today's today, as in right now? You know I can't do that. I shrugged my shoulders. Policy, no exceptions. He looked at me like I had 2 heads and walked off. I pulled this a few times on him and I felt justified in doing so. I know I was pushing it, but damn it, you can't say no exceptions and then claim an exception. I figured I could have been fired for not doing it, but at the same time, I figured I could also find another job without much difficulty. When I got moved to the morning shift, I had gotten a part-time job in the afternoons that paid enough to make it worth my time. Also, I'd already interviewed with a few places, and with the responses I was getting, I figured I wouldn't be out of work very long if I did get fired, whether it would have been legal to fire me or not. Working the morning shift had given me plenty of time to interview in the afternoons. So, because they were so pissy about getting 15 minutes of OT and acting like it was all my fault, no exceptions, period, I threw their words back at them and refused to do the OT because it has to be a 48-hour prior approval. In the long run, I like to think it hurt them more than it hurt me. Long epilogue. Not too long after this all started, I was in my boss's office at one point and there was another department head, a DH, in there, which at first didn't seem at all suspicious, but this other DH says he has an opening and he wants me to apply for it, a possible quote-unquote promotion. My boss is singing my praises and says all the regular catchphrases like, great opportunity for you, and sure would hate to lose you, but, and all that. I get it, it's not lost on me that my boss thinks he can get rid of me by having me be promoted to another department. He even wrote a recommendation about me to the big boss and helped me get selected as the WorkWise Employee of the Month, which was a monthly thing for safety-conscious employees. When I was selected, I got a certificate and a reserved parking spot for a month. So I applied for that other position. This other DH even reviews my application with me and helps me update my resume, so when the big boss does the interviews, I end up getting the job. The other helpful factor was that I had only a high school diploma, and they normally wanted someone with a degree, which would seem to be a liability, but because of how cheap this company was, they saw this as an opportunity. He doesn't have a degree, so we'll lowball him and he'll take it. Ha ha ha. And that's exactly what they did. They were right. The DH told me how much the position was supposed to pay, and the big boss offered me $2,000 below that, which was still a huge pay increase for me because of how little I was getting paid already. So I took the new job, and it was a piece of cake. It was a Monday through Friday kind of job, salaried. I no longer worked weekends and no longer worked overtime. I no longer worked from 4 to noon, and after I took the job, I would sometimes run into my boss from time to time, and he had this attitude like he was happy for having gotten rid of me. I don't think he knew I got a raise, or if he did, that didn't seem to bother him. He was rid of me, and he was happy about that. In my new job, I was a quote-unquote instructor. I was just 23 years old and mostly unqualified. I had to apply to something called a deficiency program to meet the state's requirement to do that. I had 2 sessions per day, 5 days per week. The company got paid for each person I trained in each session. From what I understand, this was decent money. I would typically have 20 students in each session. If the company was paid $50 per student, I'm guessing it was around that amount, that would be $1,000 for each session or $2,000 per day that they were making. Not bad for the company, and good for me because the position was hard to fill at what they were willing to pay, and I was below that, so everybody was a winner, except my part-time job, but that was okay. The position had even gone vacant for over a year before they asked me to fill it. Not long after I started, the DH who brought me in left and was replaced by another DH. This was a woman who everyone had already known about, and she was known for being a real hard-ass who didn't take any crap and was, at least supposedly, hard to get along with and hard to work for. I figured I wouldn't last too long with this new boss if the rumors were true, and right off she was butting heads with several of her employees because, like any new boss, she made the changes she thought needed to be made. I didn't have any problems with her, and I tried not to give her any reason to have a problem with me. One time, I got called into her office, and I'm wondering what it was about. She tells me how she got a call from HR about me and we needed to do some things, and fast. Not long before this, there had been some kind of big story in the news about a nearby city where the police and fire departments, not at all related to our work, had to pay out retirees some huge amounts of money for vacation and holidays they'd been banking over the years. The punchline to the news story was how some fire chief had over a year of vacation saved up, some of it dating back to when he was a rookie. Now the city had to pay him his current wage for a benefit that was only a few bucks when it was earned but now was worth a whole lot more. The boss lady tells me now how the HR lady was the same lady who would control the office supplies, is concerned that this was what I was trying to do, save up vacation time and holiday time that I earn at a low rate and then cash it in years later at a much higher rate. The idea never really crossed my mind, and for one thing, it didn't plan to stick around for that long. Then I got to thinking about it. In my old position, they didn't like to let me take vacations and kept me from taking holidays. My requests never even made it to HR or payroll or anywhere else, so I looked like I just didn't like taking a vacation because my previous boss wouldn't even process my requests. By this time, I had banked 3 weeks of vacation and about as much in holidays, so about 6 weeks of time total, all earned at my previous rate, but that I would get to take at my new higher rate. So the boss lady tells me that she needs me to come up with a plan for how I intend to get rid of my vacation and holiday time in a reasonable manner. I came up with a plan where I would take every Friday off for the next however many weeks it took to get down to whatever was acceptable to her or HR or whomever. When I told her of my plan, she laughed and said something like, "I guess you just want to work part-time from now on, don't you?" When I smiled, she told me, "Wow, I didn't know you had teeth." I told her I didn't know what she meant, so she told me she'd never seen me smile before, which made me realize I was way too serious around her, expecting her to be too serious and that those rumors about her were unfounded. She was just a no-crap kind of person. Before I ran out of vacation and holiday time, I decided I was going to quit that crappy job to go do something else. I still had something like 3 weeks worth of time to use up, so I figured based on company policy that I would just put in my notice, continue to work, and then just get a fat check at the end of it all, like a severance. My boss was always straight with me, so I told her my plan, even though I knew this might put me in jeopardy of being told my services were no longer needed, and I'd be out of a job earlier than I had planned. The boss lady told me she appreciated me telling her, partly because of how difficult it would be to find someone quote-unquote qualified, cheap enough, to replace me. When I put in my official notice, I got called down to HR again. The HR lady acted like she always did, like I was trying to get one over on everyone. She tells me there's no way in hell I'm working up until the last day of my employment because that would mean the company would have to pay my salary for that time and pay me out for my vacation and holiday time. She tells me instead that what they're going to do is have me work every day until I hit the point that I have an equal number of vacation days and work days left, and then I was just going to go on vacation until my final day. That way, they don't have to pay me out when I leave. I point out to her that this means I'd be leaving 3 weeks early, and if they didn't replace me, that means the company would lose the revenues they would have generated by having me continue to work, and those revenues would more than offset the amount they were paying me, probably by a 10-to-1 margin. She's not buying it. She tells me if I don't like it, I can go talk to the big boss. I gave it some thought and realized I can either take it her way and get 3 weeks off and quit working in this crappy place 3 weeks early, or I could go try to convince the big boss that I could do better to make the company a whole lot more money. The deciding factor was realizing that all I would be doing was helping someone who had screwed me out $2,000 because he knew I had no bargaining power in his contract of adhesion. So I said, screw it, let's do it your way. She tells me I have to withdraw my form and submit a new one saying I'm requesting to take a vacation during that time. I tell her no. She asks me why not. I tell her it's because I've made my request and I'm not going to do her job for her. If she rejects my request, there's the form. She can write on there that she's rejecting it and put down what she wants her official response to be. This makes her mad, but it makes me happy. I really didn't care. I would have written the request, but I was annoyed by it all. I did the rough math on some of this too. This was a company that refused to supply basic things like pens and paper and also didn't want me to get even $2 in overtime. They didn't want me to get any vacation or holidays and made me bank them. Then they decided, hey, wait a minute, I think this guy is trying to stiff us. So they were forcing me to take my built-up balance of holiday and vacation time. But at the same time, every day I took off meant a loss of revenues of at least $2,000, which was way, way, way far in excess of anything I could ever make in wages at this place. Then, when I said I would just continue to work and earn them money, but that they would have to pay me for my vacation time, they shot themselves in the foot by telling me I had to quit working earlier and take my vacation at the end of my employment rather than work till the end and cash out. Between lost inventory, additional wages, and lost revenues, their penny pinching must have cost them $60,000 just in trying to keep me from earning money.